Today's video is about Ottoman military reform in the early 18th century. This is just kind of an outline, but I thought to give some context. I think most people are familiar, at least in pop culture, or if you're from Central Europe, uh, with the story of the Battle of Vienna. Of course, King Sobieski is coming to um, kind of turn the tide at the battle. Uh, from the Ottoman perspective and from my kind of interpretation, so, there could be other interpretations, the Ottoman advance in 1683 was more of a last, uh, not quite a last gasp, but it was not, a push that I think would have imperiled Europe in some kind of civilizational sense. In fact, I don't think that the Ottomans really could have. They probably, under Suleiman, could have conquered Vienna and taken the city. Maybe they could have controlled parts of Austria, but logistically it was quite difficult. And then you have uh, the Alps in the way, so it's anyway. That's kind of a separate video. There's a scholar named Yasir Yilmaz who's, I think, working on a book about this issue. And if you have access to ProQuest, you can look at his dissertation. But anyway, uh, back to the kind of the thrust of the video. So, of course, there's the battle in 1683. However, the Great Turkish War, lasted for many years after that. The treaty that ends the war doesn't occur until 1697. However, I still think that the kind of this is an important turning point and a good kind of periodization, because it does prove that at this point, militarily, the Ottomans are at the very least equal with their peers. Now, I think it's a bit of a poor analysis when the empire is compared to Britain or England or excuse me, France or Britain in this period, and later, when it's more accurate to compare them to their peers and neighbors that they had quite a bit in common with in terms of economy and political structures, that sort of thing. So it would be, of course, the Habsburgs themselves, the Russian Empire, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But at the beginning of the 18th century, there is an idea in the empire that there needs to be some kind of military reforms undertaken uh, because of the losses. Now, another, I think, important thing to keep in mind is by the late 17th century and early 18th century, Russia is a more significant player in kind of the Ottoman sphere than they had been earlier. There of course had been conflicts between Muscovy and the Ottoman Empire before, conflicts with over the Caucasus and over points further north. But Peter the Great kind of brings about Russia's more, let's say, aggressive imperial thrust to the south. So the Ottomans fight Peter the Great at the Pruth River in 1711, and they do, in fact, win. But again, this takes place when there is an understanding of Ottoman military kind of weakness, and that leads me to what by sort of the 1720s, there's a couple figures that try to write advice works, or in the Ottoman government trying to uh, make suggestions for improved military policies. This also comes at a time when the empire begins to establish more permanent external embassies. So prior to this, in fact, most of the time, though not always, the Europeans would send their embassies to the empire, to Constantinople, usually not the other way around. Of course, back then, an embassy was not the kind of the way we think of it today, like the physical building. This was, the ambassador and kind of his retinue. That's how it worked. It was more of a traveling kind of unit. So one of the first figures is one named Yirmisekiz Mehmed Çelebi, who in 1720 goes to Paris as an ambassador, and he tries to learn from the Europeans, especially to look at their fortresses and their production facilities. And he actually was given an objective to do this in order to improve the empire. So they were trying to learn, and the dynasty was trying to come up with something to improve themselves. And I think this is important because it does show, contra some of the more popular narratives that you find in kind of pop history writing, that that they were sort of burdened with some kind of inherent conservatism because of their religion. um, and it's not to say that that wasn't a factor. That's religion in these societies, no matter what it may be, is always going to be important, but it shows that this was not as debilitating as some might argue. And if you want to read about this, Bernard Lewis was kind of the scholar that put forward a lot of those ideas. And I think his work, it's worth reading if you just want to check it out. Although I don't really agree with it, but anyway. Now, during this period, there was a big problem just with negligence in the Ottoman state in general. So some historians call this kind of early 18th century period the rule of local notables, where the central administration was kind of gave way to localized rule, which in some cases can be good. In other cases, when you need to fight kind of large imperial wars, it's not so good. And there's a quote from a work, advice kind of work. These are pretty common in Ottoman history, by one Nahifi Suleiman. It says he suggests this is what should be done. Special agents should be sent to each border fortress, and an inquiry should be conducted as to whether the required amount of ammunition is available, whether all the fortress soldiers are on duty. The deficiencies should be attended to, and repairs and fortification projects should be undertaken. Even when there is no possibility of enemy attack, the ordnance of the border fortresses should be furnished as if the enemy forces are on their way. Such a degree of care is necessary, either for the ammunition, the provisions, or the repairs. These measures should be taken without any flaws, and should be done in a way that no deficiency remains. So we see that there is a kind of defensive posture in the empire, and you could say from this, this is kind of indicative of a general decline. He doesn't discuss making counterattacks or things like that, or taking an offensive. But this sounds pretty prudent, actually, given that this is the period of, I would say, Habsburg military dominance in Central Europe, and the Russian Empire is also quite strong during this period. Now, the next work that is another proposal for kind of a military reform is by Ibrahim Mutafarrika, who was an interesting character. He was probably Transylvanian by origin. He creates the first state printing press. And just as a tangent, there were printing presses in the Ottoman Empire among different, mostly the Christian communities. It was a little controversial in Ottoman Turkish, but Mutafarrika's press was the first kind of approved one. And he wrote another one of these advice works. And I think also important to mention, so Mutafarrika lived from 1674 to 1745, so he really lived in the middle of this kind of transition period, if we could call it that. And Mutafarrika's work, advice work, is also interesting because it kind of gives some ideas about how Ottomans think about tactics, which is not always kind of written. And he writes, it has been necessary, quote, it has been necessary to examine that for some time languor in their zeal and lack in the bulk of their existence is apparent. This is describing the Ottoman army. And the army has been suffering for various reasons and causes, and describes how the army has, is typically deployed with right and left wings and a center. And the typical Ottoman tactic, which goes back, really to, I think, the steppe heritage ultimately, is, to encircle and annihilate enemy forces. And I think this is interesting because this connects to ideas about that were present even in kind of 20th century military theory, going to the like the German, maneuver warfare theorists from the First and Second World War, and then kind of the American ideas about like deep battle in the Cold War. So it's interesting that this is a kind of a similar pattern, that there's a kind of emphasis in Ottoman tactics on these big encirclements and, annihilating the army. And you can kind of see that in this engraving from 1676. This is a battle between the Ottoman army and Tatar allies against a Polish army. And although the terrain, I think, doesn't quite give the sort of ideal arrangement, I think you can see from context what they were trying to do. You have the Tatars kind of in this swirl, again, kind of with the what what the Germans were actually thinking about. They were thinking about the Battle of Cannae, where when Hannibal like encircled and destroyed the Roman army. You have this same kind of idea of an army that is trying to encircle and totally eliminate the enemy. And the one Ottoman theorist was saying we need to adopt a more defensive posture because, something like this is difficult for us right now, basically. So that's one of the ideas that's happening. Now, Mutafarika says that, talks a lot about how the Ottomans need to adopt a more European structure, and especially with the emergence of, the infantrymen in the 18th century, of, infantry, line infantry, musketeers, instead of what they had. Although the Ottomans did have musketeers, but I think Mutafarika is kind of implying the sort of more linear tactics that we're developing. He also says that they need a more disciplined chain of command, more regularity. And also, and this I think is probably the most important, but is, I think, would have been shocking to some Ottoman readers, to not have independent attacks led by individual commanders. This was fairly common in Ottoman warfare, and this was a way to gain political favor, of showing bravery. You could get a promotion, or get a land grant or something by showing bravery. But when you have to fight in a more regular style, let's say, that can get you into trouble. And Mutafarika is quite scathing, and says that this is neglecting this is why that they've been losing to the Europeans. However, he even, or not however, but he goes on to say that they also need to adopt new approaches to science and geography, and also to improve military intelligence. Mutafarika also proposes something that's also quite radical, in that, that the Ottomans have to, at this point, work in a more, let's say, realpolitik fashion of, being willing to more readily ally with, a Christian state, the unbelievers, of course, and even other Muslim states. The Ottoman Empire, I think something I like to stress in the channel is that the Ottoman Empire spent a lot of time fighting other Muslim states as well, almost from the very beginning. So that is kind of his point of view. And even though, this would have been pretty controversial, I think, Mutafarika is fairly prudent in saying that, that they've suffered major defeats, so he was writing a few decades after the losses after the Treaty of Karlowitz, and, the loss of Hungary in particular. And he even gives an idea for his motivation. And he says, I have been thinking over the reasons for the sedition that has been gradually befalling the sublime state, yet my weak mind, twisting about and in pain, has been unequal to the task, and remains mystified in darkness as to the methods of relief, from these hidden causes, how to grasp their real meaning. The ministers of the state and the pillars and the grandees of the imperial council have defaulted in the rule of politics, and showed languor in dealing with important affairs, laziness in dawdling and settling the uncertain affairs of the realm at a time when premonition and caution were what the situation necessitated. Ascribing this to their forbearance and carelessness, I have regretted with all my heart and soul, as a result of the divine intervention, or as necessitated by the nature of existence of things, or as is necessary throughout the course of human civilization, instability in the world order, and error in the regularity of human affairs have arisen. My condition has been altered with concerns of the blurriness of the possibility that the signs The causes of infirmity might afflict the disposition of this sublime state, and I have been sorrowful because of the transformation in the condition of all creatures and the inclination to sedition in the nature of people that have seemed to be in the ascendant. And while Mutafarika does not, in this treatise, directly discuss, the details of the military frontiers and the losses of territory, he basically focuses that the Ottoman army is what needs to be improved and put back into a reliable condition. And it's important to keep in mind, and as I think the author of the main source I've used for this video emphasizes, Selim Güngörörler, that this was not just Mutafarika's opinion. This was a general atmosphere, and I think that's quite true. And I don't have a good way to show this, but there are quite a few manuscripts that I've researched that date from this period, from about the 1720s to the 1730s. And I think it did have some effect, because the Ottomans did recapture Belgrade in 1739 as part of this war between the Ottomans and a coalition of Russia and Austria. And in fact, the Austrians were unable to retake Belgrade, and it only was lost to the Ottomans during the Serbian uprising and revolution in the 19th century. So I guess what do we take away from this? That the Ottoman Empire in the early 18th century was trying to reform. They had a lot of people, and I think it's important to note that if people were writing, they probably had some kind of power in the government, in the state itself. So, it's that kind of, these aren't just sort of opinion writers giving their opinion. These are people that, had an ability to make a change or influence changes. And I think it's important that we don't want to deny that the Ottoman Empire began to have problems, especially after the 1680s and 1690s. But at the same time, there was always a kind of push and pull between problems and solutions, and there were people trying to remedy this in the state. And at the same time, and also to be somewhat critical of the Ottoman sources, just like we do today, they had a tendency to overly romanticize the past. Suleiman had himself, even though he conquered quite a lot, he also had his military failures and kind of short-sighted decision-making in some areas. And, the same even in earlier Ottoman centuries, when they were, supposedly went from, strength to strength. If you watch the recent video I did about the interregnum, that was a major kind of contingency that could have really, totally altered not just the Ottoman history, but perhaps even world history. And more immediately, the Ottomans did have an opportunity probably to drive the Habsburgs out of Upper Hungary in the 1670s. There's a recent book about that, a really excellent book, The Habsburg Empire Under Siege, when the Ottomans had a kind of a sort of an alliance with some fairly strong Hungarian magnates that were anti-Habsburg, and the Grand Vizier at the time, Köprülü, who had kind of asserted the Köprülü family had kind of asserted themselves as in kind of almost a vizierial dictatorship. They had sort of taken over more direct executive power from the Sultan. And in the 1670s, they could have driven the Habsburgs out of their part of Hungary, Upper Hungary. That didn't happen. They decided to go on a campaign in Poland that they were defeated in, the Ottomans. But it was, one of these moments of kind of contingency and decision where, they could have, it's possible that they could have pushed the Habsburgs out of Hungary, and, who knows what kind of repercussions that may or may not have had. I mean, again, that's getting into counterfactual history, but it's important to think about that stuff just because it shows that, again, history is not some kind of mechanical process, or, that there's moments of contingency always, especially in military history, I think. So, in the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire was in a much weaker position militarily, although not entirely sidelined. And I think these kind of treatises and the production of knowledge in this period shows that they were well aware of that there was no kind of restriction or some sort of ideological kind of bias against this sort of critical reflection. And in fact, I think, in terms of making the Ottoman Empire more, more integrated to Europe in some ways with, embassies and things like that. Because by the mid-18th century, you have Ottoman embassies in Prussia, for example. There's a great, one of the authors I mentioned on the channel, Virginia Aksan, she wrote a great book about one of these Ottoman ambassadors to Prussia. So, all right. Well, thank you for watching. If you've made it to the end, this is kind of a long one. I hope it wasn't too long-winded. And please check out the books. I recommend if you can. And because I just like to have people read this kind of stuff for themselves and learn more. So, all right. Well, thank you for watching, and I'll hope to talk to you in the next video.